Look
can't
up.
see. Where are you?
Oh, Lord. Hey, y'all. This is Trish with Hip Homeschool Moms. I'm here with Zan and Joe Tyler and Leanne, who has her microphone muted. I don't know if you know that, Leanne, but you're muted. We'll leave her muted. Leanne is also with Hip Homeschool Moms. Hey, Zan and Joe. How are you guys doing?
Doing
Hey,
great.
hey, Trish, we're great.
I'm so glad to have y'all here. This is part of the Homeschool Teacher Appreciation Day, and we are interviewing veteran homeschoolers who have been there and done it and who have something to teach us. So we wanted to have you guys on. We're excited about having you here because y'all have already been here and done it and graduated them and have a whole nother generation starting, right?
That's right. We've got 3 grandchildren of homeschool age that are being homeschooled. And I will tell you, that is fabulous. That is worth waiting for.
Isn't that fun? And you know, I always wonder because people talk about that. You know, do you think your kids will homeschool? I mean, because that's confirmation, right?
Right. That's right. Not
So,
the only confirmation, but that is, I will tell you, it was worth 21 years of homeschooling to have the grandkids.
oh, isn't that sweet? Well, you know,
Yes.
we actually have a lot of questions like that in the group. You know, where they talk about it. That when they find out somebody was homeschooled, that's one of the very first questions. Do you plan to homeschool? So I'm not sure why that is, but the only thing I can think of is that is just confirmation that somebody did something right and they feel good about it and that they're going to repeat the process the next generation. So you did something right, Zan and Joe.
Well,
Yay.
God's grace.
You already knew that, but I just thought I'd tell you that, right?
You know, one thing we see, though, you can't, sometimes you can't judge a book by its cover, is we see a lot of kids who say they're not homeschooling, that have been homeschooled until their kids get to be school age.
That's
because
right.
they never had a bad experience with school because they were never in school.
That's right.
And then they put their child in school because they have an idyllic view of what a classroom might have been like, and it takes about 6 months. And Joe says our marketing department goes to work.
There you go.
Yes.
The marketing department.
Our marketing department is the school bureaucrats and leadership that all of a sudden their life is condensed down to the school schedule. You know, when they take vacations, the things they do, the extracurriculars, and all of a sudden they realize the homeschool lifestyle was so much more freeing. And if their kid has a special interest in something, he probably doesn't have time to pursue it because he's busy having to stay on task and get his schoolwork done. So there are a lot of blessings with homeschooling that you don't realize till they're gone, and I really do think that happens a lot with this next generation. I'm sure they fantasize growing up about what life is like in the classroom, and then when they're really exposed to it through their kids the first time, all of a sudden they see it through our eyes a little bit more.
You know, that's a good point because I think that my kids actually went to school. They didn't go to a traditional school. They went to a Montessori school, so it's not quite the same. But you know what? I hadn't even thought about it from that perspective, that the children that have never been to school may actually fantasize and romanticize, you know, what it really might look like. So that's a good point. I have not thought about that, Joe. See, I'm so glad you're here. A man's perspective, it always brings a different twist, a different, you know, facet to the conversation. I enjoy that. Yay. So y'all have 2 boys, right?
We do. 2 boys and a daughter.
I was about to say, and a little girl. And now is it the daughter that has the oldest, that has your granddaughter? Is that right?
No, it's my oldest son, Ty, who is 36, has 2 girls. And then John has 3 boys. And then Lizzie, who's the youngest, she's 27, just got married a month ago.
Oh, that's right. That's right. She's the one that just got married. I knew there was something going on with her. I was thinking she had the oldest daughter, but that's right. She just got married. So you were part of that founding pioneer there. Y'all were in South Carolina with homeschooling. So I know one of your granddaughters is really proud of the fact that Grandma and Granddaddy were these pioneers, and Grandma almost got arrested at least once, maybe more. with their whole homeschooling initiative.
Oh,
And that's another story, and we actually have that on video. We'll tell that later, right? We'll
that's
point
right.
to it. We'll point to it. But with y'all and doing the homeschooling thing with boys that are really, really close together, was that hard? I mean, did y'all find any secrets that help moms out here? I mean, some of us are so tired we can't even hardly see straight.
Well, what I ended up doing, especially as my oldest son got into high school, and this was in the early 90s. Ty graduated in 97, I guess, from high school, and there weren't co-ops and there weren't online classes, so we were basically doing everything. I think by the time Ty graduated, we had a Spanish tutor and a science class that met outside the home, and that was pretty much it. So I think, out of self-preservation and knowing my youngest son could handle it, when Ty started high school in the 9th grade, I started John in high school in the 7th grade. And I just said, John, you're doing everything Ty's doing. So by the time he had finished the 10th grade, he had finished physics and, English. So it was, looking back, I can't really believe I did that to John. At the time, I just thought, he can handle it, and this makes life doable, and he's a very good lawyer these days, and but it did work, and sometimes you just have to find what works for your family, and not what works for somebody else's family.
Isn't that the gospel truth? So were your kids ever in a stage, which I'm hoping this is a stage and a phase, because y'all have 2 boys, y'all can tell me this, that they go through the stage where they just don't want to get up, they don't want to get after their work, and they're just, you feel like you're pulling tooth and nail against a donkey that has dug in, that doesn't want to get after it? Please tell me it's a phase.
I think I may still be in that phase.
Well, Zan, have you gotten him out of it? Do you know what to do here? Because, Lord, I sure could use some help.
Well, it's funny. When my oldest son went to college, and Ty and John were 9 and 7 when Lizzie was born, so there was quite an age discrepancy. But Ty was always my one, who's a salesman now and doesn't have to sit still for work. He makes his living with his mouth and moving.
Right.
And that's how he was during school. We had to be talking, moving, and doing something all the time. And he was always the one who said, let's go take a break. Let's go take this field trip. Let's do this. So the first year he went to college, I was sitting back at the dining room table with just John and Lizzie, who were my more focused students. Ty definitely had his areas of brilliance. It was just not sitting still. And Lizzie, who was 10, after about 3 weeks, looked at me and she said, Mom, you got to do something in here, because ever since Ty left, all we do all day long is what we're supposed to do. And at this rate, I'm 10. I'm going to be through with high school in 2 years, 3 months, and 7 days. It takes all kinds.
It does take all kinds, and that's a great segue, because you've written a book about this. You've written a book about how to cultivate your child's potential. So tell us about your book.
Well, I had so many parents in the early years of homeschooling who would get so frustrated with having to fill out reports for the school district that just talked about academics. This is before we had other alternatives. And it really made me start thinking about everything that goes on in our home that's powerful before the first book is ever cracked. And that it's the foundational principles of home life and homeschooling that make the homeschooling work so well. And so in my book, I talk about the 7 tools, and the first tool is just developing a sense of identity in your children, not only who they are, but whose they are. They belong to God, and who they are as part of a family. And Jay Taylor, who was the president of Youth for Christ and went on to be president of Taylor University, said that we have an identity crisis today that he called a corporate identity crisis. And he said kids used to belong to the Jones family, and they were known as the Jones boy. But we've lost that in our culture, where families no longer have a corporate identity. And so I just think by virtue of the fact that they're growing up in a home, not perfect homes, but homes that have their own culture and their own identity and their own mission is so powerful in the life of a child. And then the second thing in my book, and I'll make this real quick, that I talk about is just developing intimacy. Because when you have intimate relationships with your kids, vibrant, dynamic relationships with your kids, education can flow. And there's so much power in those relationships. And one of the things I love to talk about is just how conversation not only develops bigger brains but deeper relationships, and is a powerful discipleship tool. And it's free. I do a whole workshop on that. And it's the power of homeschooling, giving us time to relate and communicate and talk. And, I mean, in a classroom, your kid may have 8 or 9 interactions with a teacher on any given day. At home, you know, it's 100 or 1,000, or sometimes you feel like 10,000 questions. Mm-hmm. And then I think it's just when you figure out what your child's learning style is, what their spiritual gifts are, what their passions are, like Eric Little said, when I run, I feel God's pleasure, even though he was called to be a missionary in China. So I think that as our kids know who they are and they have close relationships with their parents and family, and as they discover how God has gifted them, then God is just free to draw their potential out of them. And I think homeschooling is a tool. It's not the end game, but it is a powerful tool, I think, in the hands of a parent that's co-laboring with the Holy Spirit.
Those are some powerful words. I'm taking notes. I don't know about everybody else, but I got my notes going, so thank you, Zan. I'm going to, you know what, that sounds like a fantastic book. I mean, if that didn't pique anybody's interest, I don't know what will. I'm buying it. How's that? Seriously, though, you're doing a lot of speaking these days, both you and Joe. Y'all are all over the country talking about all these different things. What's your most popular conference title right now?
Joe, what you think?
I think it's probably our marriage talk that we do, because your marriage really does form the foundation of your homeschooling. I mean, your relationship with the Lord obviously does, but a close second to that is a relationship with your wife. And what I encourage men to do is make sure that they keep that relationship strong. I think they have to continue to pursue their wives, continue to date their wives, woo their wives, and focus on that relationship, because the wife's tendency is to focus on her children, and sometimes dads will focus on their work or their hobbies
instead. Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden they've grown apart, and their kids grow up and go away to school, and they stare at each other and realize they're living with a stranger. And it really it should not be that way. We should enjoy our kids, and Zan and I certainly did. We had a ball with our kids, still do. But it's not number one, and it can never be number one.
That's such a powerful statement. It's so true. And I think that the fact that you were so wise to actually acknowledge that that's a mom's tendency to focus on our children, and to understand that, and not to pull away, but to pull, to push in there, and be a part of it. How do you do that? How do you as a dad, especially because you traveled a lot, right? How do you do that?
Well, I worked with a startup software company in the late 70s when IBM mainframe computers were the rage, and nobody knew how to pull off these projects. So inevitably, you had to bail them out at the very end by lots of nights and weekend work, and I would have to go on site and practically live there for a week or two. And it was a challenge, but we stayed in constant contact. Even it's easier now than it was then. Back then, I don't know how many times I would be in a different time zone, and I would realize I needed to call Zan right after the boys went to bed and before she passed out, and the time to do that was right as I got my food in some restaurant in another town. So I would leave the table and go to the payphone in the lobby and actually call home and just to make sure we touched base. And if there were special things going on, I always had a presence with the boys and Lizzie about it, and we spent a lot of time talking about it. I think another secret is, I think sometimes I've seen that where moms really get so worn out, with the day in, day out teaching their kids, that by the weekend they want to break, and sometimes dads kind of take over the sports and that sort of thing. With Zan and I, the way it evolved is I was a basketball and baseball player, good old Christian American sports, and my kids, lo and behold, chose things that I had no interest in at all. They chose a communist sport, soccer. You know, if you can end the game in a tie, it's an un-American sport. If you can't touch the ball with your hands, it's communism. So they chose this communist sport I knew nothing about. And one year, the only way they were going to get to play is if I coached the team. And I told the guy, I said, I don't know anything about soccer. And I remember actually waiting until the other coach set up his players so I would know where to tell my kids to go.
Oh, Lord.
But anyway, we did that together.
This was in the revival of soccer, back in the 70s.
Yeah,
It was not a normal thing then.
Yeah, soccer is always the great sport of the future. It's still the great sport of the future in America. But for little kids, they just love it because they can run and kick right out of the chute. No special skills required, and that's what they chose. So I think as a parent, you've got to let your kids choose their interests, but you need to do it with them. I've seen parents that had situations like this. Well, my daughter chose musical theater. I didn't know anything about musical theater, but I knew I didn't want to leave her down there by herself, so Zan and I would make sure one of us was there all the time during the rehearsals and everything else, so we could be involved. And I think that's the thing to do, is your relationship with your kids are deepened and cultivated when they see that you're willing to give of yourself so that they can pursue things that interest them. Because if you try to influence them to pursue your interests, I don't know, it may or may not work. They may do it, be half-hearted about it, and there are lots of lessons there to be learned no matter what it is. Lizzie, I never thought musical theater would lead to any kind of career at all, but lo and behold, Lizzie is a news producer today, and a lot of it, I know, is her background in musical theater, having to ad-lib, having to memorize, having to prepare, and that having that start time when the show happens, and whether you're ready or not, here it comes. All those experiences, I think, led right into that. And with my boys, there were so many life lessons. The main thing they learn in soccer is that the world is unjust, and they will not get justice this side of heaven. Referees are forever awful because they're usually teenage kids that they're paying $1 an hour to referee some games, so they don't care. And your kid will be picked on, slighted, fouled. The refs will cheat and all that. And kids need to experience that. And they tell them, yep, life can be like that sometime. You're not always going to win. There's not always going to be justice. They need to learn those lessons. And I think them getting knocked around a little bit is good for them as well, because they'll certainly face that in the business world and probably in ministry too. Let's not kid ourselves. People compete,
That's right.
So anyway, I think those things really worked out well in our lives, and I think we made some good decisions in the time we spent. One other thing I'll mention is, and I hope I don't get too many dads in trouble out there, because I know it's probably mainly moms listening right now, but
no, they're gonna play this over again later for Dad to hear it. Are you kidding?
They'll make them. That'll be bad. So, I played a lot of sports and loved sports, and I loved to hunt and fish as well. And when the kids were little, I just realized that I was having to choose between them and those other avocations that I had, and I chose them. And I did things that they wanted to do at their level, knowing that one day I would get it back, and I do get it back. I go hunting with my son now, and that's a great time with him, and I knew one day all that would come back to me, and it certainly has. But dads, you've got to choose, make some hard decisions, and you and your wife need to work together on that, because there are times when your wives will need to be with their buddies, and Zan and her friends didn't do near enough of that I think coming along, looking back, I wish she would have had a group of friends she did stuff with regularly without any children around. But to keep your marriage strong, I think you have to keep dating your wife. And what we found is we had to establish rules when we went out together that we were going to talk about the kids or not. Because sometimes you can go out together and then you realize you spent 2 hours talking about nothing but the kids. And there are times for that, but it's important to continue to date your wife, because you can date your wife with 100% results, you know.
Zan, you got a good one. He made me cry. Can y'all tell? I'm literally tearing up. See? He made me cry.
We know you,
Joe, you're such a softie. Why didn't you tell me that before the call? I didn't know I was going to cry. Darn.
He's a good daddy.
I could tell. Really, that really spoke. I mean, that some dads needed to hear that. Thank you for sharing that. Wow. Yeah, I wasn't expecting that. That wasn't planned, y'all. So just so y'all know, you just got the real Joe.
And actually, I finally got to the point where I actually enjoyed watching soccer. It took a while, but I finally understood it, and even watched some of the World Cup a few years ago by myself, just because I got to where I appreciated it. So.
That is so funny. So y'all do, from what I have gathered, y'all have very different careers from your children. I'm fascinated. How brilliant was that your daughter is now in newscasting after that foundational theater experience? So tell us about your kids. So you homeschooled them all the way through, right?
That's right, from kindergarten through high school.
So tell us, sort of give us a snapshot of what your homeschool was, where they went to college and where they landed, because I think that's very encouraging to us out here. And were they these fantastic students, or were they, give us a little picture of them. And sorry, guys, I hope your kids don't get mad at me for asking that.
No, I mean, our children are still such a joy in our lives. They were such a joy to us when they were home, and that doesn't mean we never had bad days or anything, but we just loved them, and we still love them and what they're doing. Ty was the oldest, and he was my auditory kinesthetic learner, which meant he never sat still for very long, and he was always talking. And I read a book early on. I had to use a curriculum when we first started homeschooling that odd laws back in the 70s, but the curriculum every morning said, fold your hands and put your feet on the floor and look your teacher in the eye, and it was kind of one of these don't move and parrot back curriculum. And and I just remember every day I felt guilty because my homeschool never looked like that. So one day I came downstairs. I said, okay, today we are doing real school. The boys were 6 and 4. No more playing with those cars or crayons. You're going to look me in the eye and not say a word unless you are asked. And it was the most miserable day we'd ever had. And shortly after that, I stumbled on a book about learning styles. Now, you have to give me a little slack. This is the 80s, the early 80s. And it was the first book I'd ever read on learning styles. And in it, I just flipped to a portion talking about the auditory kinesthetic learner that said if your child learns by moving and doing, those are unacceptable classroom behaviors. So if you can get them out of school, they will be the biggest successes in life.
Yeah.
And it was just like ding, 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 and I realized that even though that was not acceptable in a classroom, they were not bad things. It was who God made Ty to be. And so that was like Independence Day in our homeschooling. And I mean, because
I love that.
Because Ty could be who God created Ty to be. John and Ty's a salesman today. It makes perfect sense. And Ty's spiritual gift is evangelism, and he loves talking to people, and he shares with surgeons in and out of the operating room. I mean, it just is who he is. And, I mean, I'm sure I stifled him some, but he was not stifled by a classroom environment where he couldn't talk and move. So he ended up going to Covenant College his first 3 years on a soccer scholarship.
Communist,
soccer.
communist, the Soviet Union. Yeah, the Soviet Union sponsored that scholarship.
Joe, you did something right if you ended up being the coach. Wow, check you
No.
out. Okay, I'm impressed.
Yeah, no, he was president of his freshman class. He was there for 3.5 years until he had an injury after getting a terrible migraine, lost his eyesight in his right eye, and came home and graduated from the University of South Carolina. This is interesting. This is the early days of the internet. He puts his resume online, and he's contacted by a recruiter because he was a college athlete. So he got his first job in sales because of his soccer.
Oh, see, Joe, really, are you really going to talk bad about soccer now? Come on.
Well, the other crazy part of that story is he was in his last semester and he only was taking one class. So he committed himself to duck hunting. And I was so mad at him. I would get on him, you need to get your resume together and get out there and beat the bushes, that's the way it's done. And he said, I've got my resume on the internet, no big deal. Well, lo and behold, he goes in for the interview because the guy found his resume on the internet, much to my chagrin. And when he got there, the guy interviewing him was a guy he had helped whose duck boat had broken down out in the middle of the lake. So here God used two things that I thought were total wastes of time to get him his first job. Oh, well.
It was just to correct you. You know that,
Yep.
right?
Absolutely.
Isn't that fun? Is that not one of the greatest stories? I love that. So tell us about number 2 and number 3.
Okay.
So we have
and Ty has 2 girls, and they're homeschooling the 6-year-old. The oldest is a freshman in college. And actually, Tristan's 8. She would be highly insulted if I called her 6.
There you go.
And then John is 34, and he has 3 little boys who are 7, 5, and 2. And he's an attorney with a firm here in Columbia. He was just always, he would say sometimes to me, Mom, if you just give me my books and leave me alone and stay out of my way, I can finish my schoolwork. And he was our resident theologian. When he was 4, he and Ty were taking a hike with my sister, and Sybil said they saw a big indentation on Stone Mountain, and Ty, who was 6, looked at John and says, Hey, John, that footprint is so huge it must be God. And little 4-year-old John says, Ty, God is a spirit and hath not a body like man. And so,
there you go.
So John has always been our resident theologian. We sort of called him the Holy Spirit in our family because he kept everybody on the straight and narrow. And they're both deacons and elders in their church. They're real involved in their churches, and John's real involved as a founding elder in a church plant. And they're just loving. They're both just raising their kids to love Jesus, which I just have to say is the most glorious thing in my life, is to see my sons and their wives, who I consider my daughters, raising their kids to love Jesus. It's just an amen moment, Okay. And then Lizzie is 27, and it's funny because the boys grew up at the State House with me while I was lobbying for legislation, and we were in court or the legislature the first 8 years we homeschooled. And so they really did grow up at the State House with me. And They both very politically involved, and it kind of spills over into the careers they've challenged and the careers they've chosen and the way they live their lives. And John's very involved in some public policy issues as an attorney. And then Lizzie grew up with news cameras in her home because there was always a homeschool crisis, and so there were just more news cameras filtering through our house than I can count. And so she saw, that's really what gave her a heart for journalism to begin with, was seeing the power of the press. And so I remember CBS or NBC News came down to South Carolina to do a big nightly news interview, and I wasn't part of it, but they asked me to be there for some reason. And this reporter, I have Ty and John, who are teenagers, and Lizzie with her little ponytail with her bow in it, and the reporter comes up to her, 6 years old, and says, Lizzie, tell me what you've missed by not being in a public school room. And
Oh
it kind
my
of took my
goodness.
breath away because I thought, you want to pick a fight with somebody, you fight with me, but you leave
That's
my
right.
cute little girl out of it. Well, she put her little hands on her sassy little hips and she says, drugs and violence and lots of it. And
Woo!
I thought, okay, in the first place, how does she know those two words? And then in the second place, why wasn't she intimidated? But that is just who she is, and she's always taken a stand, and she's always been, adventurous and in control, and so it was just she came home one day. She was Annie in the community theater production, and she had another lead role. And she came home one day and she said, "Mom," she's in the 8th grade, "I've seen a lot of starving artists in musical theater. Seems like there's probably a career where I could use the same skill set." And she started pursuing, she's very practical like her dad, and she started pursuing her interest in journalism.
That's
So
fantastic.
it's just interesting to see how God weaves the storyline in their lives, and how God, Deb Bell said something one time that has just resonated with me all my life, that God delights in opening doors for our children and blessing them in ways that we don't have the resources for.
Oh, that's
And,
great.
to me, that's a hallelujah thing, that God is our superintendent of education. He has our children in the palm of his hands, and he will direct their steps just like he's directed ours.
Isn't that amazing?
So
And we just have to trust. Just trust.
that's
And
right.
sometimes that's hard. Sometimes that's
It's
really hard.
very hard, and it's intimidating when you feel like the buck stops with you as the homeschooling mom. Oh, wait a minute, I can't blame that crummy algebra teacher, or that
That's
bad
right.
whatever. Yeah, it's so much. It's the heaviness of that responsibility, I think, that's the most wearing part of homeschooling. Harder
I
than being
agree.
threatened with jail, harder than facing all of that stuff is just knowing at the end of the day, you know,
The buck
you've been
stops
it.
there. That's
Yeah.
right. That's right. I agree. Well, Leanne just popped in and said we have questions coming in. So
Yes.
Leanne has popped a few of them over there.
Yeah.
Y'all ready?
Do you want me to read them? I can.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the first question is from Apollyanna. She says, "How can I involve my husband without complaining about being tired, or when you're having those bad days? How do you involve your husband when it's just been some of those bad days, or without, like I said, without really complaining about how bad it's been? How can you get your husband involved on those kind of instances?"
Well, it's I think in a way you look for teachable moments. There will be seasons in your husband's life and career, just like there's seasons in your homeschooling, and I wouldn't despair, because man, God uses us as we are, and some creative things I can think of to do is to see what he's interested in doing. Todd Wilson wrote an article one time that I got a kick out of. He said, "Moms, if your dad's ever offered to teach a class, let them. Step back and don't help them at all, and don't take it back over, no matter how badly they do." So look for ways for your husband to be involved, and ask him what things would he like to do. Zan credits a lot of what I did with the kids as education and the homeschooling, even though to me it was just fun, like nature walks.
Oh.
I've always loved nature. Now, one of the reasons I love nature is I like to have a gun in my hand as I went out in nature, but my that translated to lots of walks, lots of nature walks and stuff with the boys, and I just taught them the stuff I knew. And you would not believe the number of homeschool kids that graduate from high school, their homeschool high school, and don't know the skills their parents take for granted. I mean, I deal with Excel spreadsheets and Word all the time, and PowerPoint, and if my kids graduate from my homeschool and don't know those skills, I'm crazy. What was I thinking? So
Mm-hmm.
more than likely, if it's something your husband is interested in, he'll be all over it. But if it's an idea that is that you kind of push on him, and that's the wrong word. I don't know the right word there, but I have seen instances where you can kind of a wife can cajole her husband into doing something that that it's not his interest. Because, and I'd remember this too. Your husband's #1 job is to love you and to fund homeschooling. And so if he does those two things well, count yourself blessed. Looking back, I would say, I jokingly say when I talk sometime that if you added up all we homeschooled the grand total of 31 years when you added all the grades and the kids went through, and I'll laughingly say I think if you added up all my education with the kids, it would amount to about 1 course and a half. And Zan always corrects me on that and points out all these other things I did beyond a textbook type of education. I didn't see that as education, but she did. So I'm glad that she credits me with that. But I would just encourage you to look for what your husband is interested in and what your husband would enjoy doing with the kids, and encourage that. And if he ever offers, just step back and let him. And I think it will be yes, because it's all about building those relationships and keeping them strong. And if parents are engaged with their kids and doing things that are mutually enjoyable, boy, that is great when that happens.
That's a good answer.
I know this is a G-rated chat, so I'll keep it G-rated. But I think we can focus so much on our children's needs that we forget that our husband has needs too, emotional and physical. And I think we need to be careful to remember to focus on our husbands as well, and not for them to get lost totally in the homeschool chaos that surrounds all of us who homeschool. And that, I think that has to be part of it as well. I used to try, I wasn't always successful, to find 10 minutes in my day where I would separate myself and pray for Joe and think about what does Joe need, what's going on in his life. And that gave me 10 minutes, which doesn't sound like much, but to focus my attention on him and pray for him. And but it just reminds us that our husbands are people, their jobs are hard, and they have needs too. And it's real hard. Having kids and homeschooling is so demanding. It's really hard to realize that they are living demanding lives as well, just demands in a different way.
Very good advice. Very, very good advice. And that was good. You did keep it G. Leanne, did you have any other questions that were out there?
Yes. Another great question that was asked. Don Day asked, how do you focus on homeschooling during great trials?
You know, and Joe will have some thoughts on this too, but I heard a great quote one time by Ray Vanderlaan. He is the guy who did all the films for Focus on the Family that used the Holy Land as teaching tools. And he's got his PhD, I think it's in Hebrew Studies. He's a Christian educator, teaches in a Christian school, and he said that the books we choose for our kids are our curriculum. The interruptions God brings are his curriculum. And we have to be careful because we can let a whole school year go by sometimes in the midst of trial and have lost the whole thing. But on the other hand, we need to realize, I mean, when we were going through the legislative process and Joe was on the road and it was very intense and policemen were driving up and down our street, I mean, I'm not talking about fun times. I would come home sometimes at night. I can remember sitting in my closet and weeping over the workbook pages we didn't get done because we had spent yet another day at the legislature. Well, little did I know that God was using all those experiences in my boy's life to weave in them this natural understanding of politics. I mean, they both went on to boys' states, being president of their freshman classes in college, being legislative aides in the Senate. And, I mean, I can remember John was 20, I think, and he had started out at Covenant College and came back to USC. he was president of his class at Covenant, but he said, Mom, I really want to get back to USC because they want me back in the Senate to work again, and I feel like that's real life, whereas student council wasn't as real. And at that age, it was one of the gubernatorial elections, and one of the senators used John that year when he would have double speaking engagements booked to speak for him. So we would go hear the gubernatorial and the candidates for us for lieutenant governor speak, and there were a couple of times where we were watching John take one of the state senators' place. So, you know, that was a teaching time. I can remember, excuse me, I just lost my earbud. I can remember during one of the legislative sessions that was so awful. I was also 6 months pregnant, and I lost the baby and almost died. And it was, we didn't think we'd have any more children, and then a year and a half later we had Lizzie, and so she was just God's great gift to us, as the boys were, but it was totally unexpected. And it was just horrible, and I almost died during childbirth. And that was the one time I just wanted to go home and grieve by myself and put the boys in school and let the world go by, because I was a wreck, and we had just finished a terrible legislative session. Actually, I remember I was looking through my notes years later, and it was in the hospital when we lost Joy that I got the call from the State Department of Education that we were having our first hearing on homeschooling. And so Joe and I actually had to plan that public hearing from the hospital room after losing Joy. And so I was just a mess. But the boys learned so much about life and death and eternity during that time period. I could not, if I had spent 6 months teaching them every Bible verse on eternity and heaven, they would not have learned what they learned through the life and death and resurrection of Joy. And so, Joe, I don't know if you've got anything to add, but I really do think that the trials God brings are huge teaching tools for our kids.
Absolutely, and we had a few. Not only was there the legislative disruption, but there was also disruptions when my dad was from a big family, and I would have an uncle die or an aunt die, and we would go to the funerals, and we just had to drop everything to do that. But I always thought, man, what a great opportunity. I want these boys to see real life. I don't want them to be insulated in a schoolroom from all strata of society and all ages. And sure enough, I mean, they always were totally comfortable talking to any adult of any age, and they learned how to speak respected with a lot of respect and say good old yes sir, no sir, yes ma'am, no ma'am. That's kind of a lost art these days. But the things you model before your kids in those situations goes way beyond what a textbook can teach them. And I'm always amazed at how fast a kid can catch up. I've heard so many stories about homeschool kids just because they know how to teach themselves, they know how to be self-taught, that if they're deficient in any area when they get to college due to their parents' homeschool curriculum, they catch up so fast. And our boys excelled in areas I never would have imagined. My middle son, John, was the one that I felt like would go into a scientific career and become a doctor. He's now a lawyer, but my older son, I never imagined working in the medical field, but lo and behold, Ty's been a very successful medical device salesman, and it's because of his giftedness in other areas that he didn't always exhibit when he was growing up. But it is amazing. All your kids learn from the lives that they watch you live. I mean, I'm reminded of Jesus. You know, he didn't send the disciples to a seminar. They lived with him. They traveled with him. They saw him day in and day out. And really, a homeschool mom is a Jesus figure in the life of her kids because they witness her every day, watching her live her life. And moms, if you guys think, oh well, goodness, I think you think about how many times you fail or you think you're being an awful example sometime, but it is remarkable how your kids have the memories that you hope they have of your best times. And somebody a while ago asked, how do you homeschool during hard times? I mean, in our homeschool organization, we've seen moms that have gone through cancer and have continued to homeschool in some way, and the temptation was to want to institutionalize the kids' education and put them in a public or private school. But man, they probably learned so much more from their moms by being with them in those hard times than they would have learned otherwise. So I don't know, I'm all about the relationships that are forged in the crucible of homeschooling, both for the mom and the kids.
I love that. That's some wise thoughts there. I love. Who did you say quoted this, Zan? The interruptions are God's curriculum. Who said that?
Ray Vanderlaan, and I'm sure you can Google him.
Yeah, that's a great quote. I love that quote. I'm going to have to use that. So we actually are at the end of our time. Leanne, I know you had more questions, and I'm sorry, guys, we're done. So y'all are going to have to come back. That's just what it boils down to. We'll have to have you back. Maybe we'll have a different topic to talk about. Is that okay with you two?
Absolutely.
Oh, man, we'd love it. Y'all are so much fun, Trish, and we just enjoy the opportunity you and Leanne give us. Thank you.
Well, we appreciate it. We love having y'all here, and we love having veterans that can help us walk this walk, because there's so much we can learn from y'all. And the words that y'all spoke to us really did speak life into our homeschool. I hope y'all realize that. So, I mean, literally, Joe, if you get me crying, ask Leanne. I don't cry very often, so you did good.
All right.
That's pretty impressive. So next time, will you warn me you're going to do that, though? Darn.
I'll do it.
Okay.
I'll do it.
Well, thanks, y'all. We really appreciate it. Looking forward to, we have 2 more interviews coming up. We have Rachel, Carmen, and Davis, and the Fletchers, Kendra and Fletch. And then we're going to have a single homeschool mom. We're going to be talking to Mary Jo Tate later this afternoon. So y'all keep with us. Give us about 15 minutes to start this over again, and we'll be back. But thank you, guys. We really appreciate having y'all here. And we're going to do this again. I enjoy talking to y'all. Y'all have a great afternoon.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks, Trish.
Thank you.